Thank you for joining us. I know where you are sitting right now, it's past midnight, and we don't take that for granted. Thanks for making time to join us. And as already mentioned, we welcome you once again to our discussion this evening. And this weekend, brought to you by the Personal Ministries Department at Edenvale Seventh-day Adventist Church, we would like to discuss the subject of the Sabbath. Before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves, I would like to quickly read from Exodus chapter 20. I'll read from verse 8, and it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word. I am particularly excited today to be discussing this topic because it's an important topic, and also because the brothers that are joining us or that will be helping us understand this subject are brothers that are near and dear to me, and I will ask them, each one of them, to introduce themselves, firstly with Kabanchi, who's just given us our opening prayer.
Thank you, Uncle Mayford. Hi, everybody. I'm Kabanchi. I think for most of us that are here, you do remember me. Of all the panelists here, I'm the youngest brother of all of them, and it's really a pleasure to be joining you in terms of sharing the word of God together and being able to dive deep into this. When Uncle Mayford messaged and requested, I could not say no. It was an opportunity to be able to get back together with everybody at Edenvale Church, as well as with my brothers in this discussion. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Kabanchi. Malvin, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Malvin, and I'm Malvin, based in South Africa, unlike some people. Kawench in particular, but grew up in Edenvale Church, love the church a lot, taught me a lot, grew up with these brothers that you see and a couple of other people in the panel as well, and in the chat room or the meeting. Looking forward to the discussion as well. Subject that is important for young people especially, and almost losing its significance, if you can say, and that should not happen, in my opinion, because it has real benefits that have been realized in my life, and I think in the lives of those that will be part of the panel. So looking forward to it.
Thanks, Malvin. Mwila, over to you.
Hey, everyone. Happy Sabbath, brothers and sisters in Christ. Mwila's the name. I think, this is quite interesting because these are conversations which we had like at church amongst the people here, and a number of others as well. So it's just interesting that it's going to be on a public platform. So I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Saini. Tammy.
I was already about to start talking to myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Tamsamula. Grew up also at Edenvale. But I'm sure now there's a whole lot of new faces there at Edenvale, but I grew up with these brothers, and now stay in Pretoria. Looking forward to this topic. I was also, just as Mula alluded to, it's actually very interesting. We among ourselves generally have these conversations, and we try delve into such topics, and try and make them applicable to ourselves as well, and try get a holistic understanding of it besides what was taught to us when growing up. Because there's one thing to just be told something. So looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tsoka. Malumbo, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I guess the last but not the least, I'm Malumbo Kasanda, and I guess like everyone has mentioned, we grew up going to Edenvale Church when we were young, up until we ended up, I guess, university and the rest and moving out. I currently stay in Sweden. But yeah, this is an interesting topic. As Tam has alluded, we've talked about this quite a while. We have a regular like study even among ourselves, so it has come up. Everyone has sort of brought their points and views. So it'll be interesting to now have our conversation out in the public as well. So we'll see how it goes.
Thank you very much. And I like the way you all say when we grew up in Edenvale. And I take it you're assuming that you've grown up, which is also okay. That is fine. And yeah, I'm particularly pleased to have you gentlemen join the discussion today. And you all made reference to having referred to such topics. And, you know, I didn't know that you had a chat group where you continue to discuss. And I'd just like to put it out there and say, you know, I was really touched just to learn that you guys continue to be in touch and in touch as you also study the Word of God. And yeah, so the focus of this weekend, we really want to discuss the Sabbath. I know we've heard this subject before. Others are here that they've heard the subject. They probably do understand it. Maybe others more than we do it or understand it from a different perspective. And we're looking at it from the theme is the Sabbath, our visible, distinguishing, identifying mark. And I'd like to maybe start off from there. If I can start with Mila, probably, just to talk about, maybe to break this down, what, when we talk about something being visible, something that is a distinguishing mark, what is your understanding on that?
All right. So I think when you sent the topic, or when I was given the topic, I found it quite interesting in how it was worded. But two things which I'd just like us to just consider. I think there's actually a term called a visible distinguishing identifying mark, which usually if you're like filling forms, for example, and for like passports, and they ask, do you have any visible distinguishing mark, which would be something physical on your actual body, which can distinguish you as a person from anyone else. So things like scars, tattoos, and the like. So that got me thinking in my mind, running to now seeing that how does this to some extent relate to that of the Sabbath? And when looking at it as the Sabbath, that there are many Christians, for example, but the Sabbath observance of keeping the Sabbath on a Saturday makes us separate to a lot of other denominations which are out there. So it being a distinguishing mark, to some extent, we can start off from there being that of the observance of the Sabbath. There's a lot more there, but I think let's that's just my bit on that before we move forward.
Thanks. And Tammy, your view on that, anything to add?
Yeah, it's generally sometimes as Mila's talking about, it's a distinguishing mark, or like it's something physical that you can see, and it can, you know, at times even in life you tend to, if you've got birthmarks, we can call them, or something, sometimes you shun away from it, you cover them, you try hide them, and you find that even also when you grow up, this distinguishing mark can also become like a sore thumb to other people. So even when you now start having conversations, you seem like you kind of like go into a shell and maybe not try, you know, like if someone points out a birthmark or some defect on you, I'm not trying to, let me not use the word defect, but the mark itself, there's two ways of trying to look at it. And yeah, it can be positive, as in being very unique, and one can thrive in the fact that there's uniqueness to it, or one can shun and go in a shell because of this distinguishing mark.
Thanks. And gentlemen, you've thrown in some interesting words there. You've talked about a birthmark, and maybe to pick your brain, Malumbo, a birthmark looking at the context of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, just in the name itself. What are expressions on that?
I guess it's in the name. It catches out. When I've been in places where people don't know what Seventh-day Adventist is, and so when the first time they hear it is seventh day, like then it start. That's where your conversation starts. Seventh day, like Sunday, Saturday, like it's already a starter. You already are identified just in the name. Like, okay, it's something to do with the day, and then people start asking, okay, what is an Adventist? But your conversation starts from the name immediately. So I think with our observation of Sabbath on the seventh day and it being in the name, it is already a conversation starter, or at least something that makes people know that, okay, these are these people. For those who do know Seventh-day Adventists, immediately you say that I'm Seventh-day Adventist, or the ones who go to church on Saturday. Like, the name gives you who they are. You can easily, and I guess going with what we're talking about, identifying, like you can easily identify which type of people or who is talking when just by hearing the name as well.
Interesting. The name has also been butchered. Others have called it 7 days. Others have called it whatever they know. But anyway, Malvin, your reflection on the theme for the weekend.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of similar thoughts around its peculiarity and its like identifying features. But I think as well the visible part is important. Like you can see it. You can see Adventists when they go to church on a Saturday, when everyone's going to the mall and they're dressed in suits, and it's quite difficult to miss because it's very unusual on a Saturday to see that. It's like, are you going to work? What's going on? What's happening here? And there's something quite distinguishing about Adventists and just how they look. And besides just the Sabbath itself, but they're just the Adventist himself. And now when you add on the part of the seventh day, it's like the first thing you see is today's a Saturday and there's someone wearing a suit going to a place of worship. And along with that, there's a lot of other visible distinguishing features that are aligned to that name. But I think also with the distinguishing aspect of it, the visible part is very obvious. It sticks out like a sore thumb when something that's not supposed to be happening on a Saturday is happening consistently, and it looks it looks organized, and it's like, what's going on here? So it's quite obvious to see.
Great, thanks, Malvin. And moving on to you, Kabanchi, maybe get the conversation a bit in motion now. What does Sabbath observance mean to you?
Yeah, I think this is something that has evolved or I've adapted with over time. Growing up, it was just going to church, Sabbath school, divine service, pathfinders or adventures in the afternoon, then come back home, and then next Sabbath again. But with growing up and going through different experiences, just a bit of context. I'm in Thailand at the moment, and the Christendom in Thailand is very, very small. Thailand is a country of the population of 66 million, and the entirety of Christians in Thailand make up less than 1% of the population. Right, the majority of the culture here is Buddhism. Right, so Buddhism and Thai culture are so infused that you can't even tell the difference between where the religion begins or ends, or where the culture begins or ends. And so coming to this about almost 8 years ago, it made me value the Sabbath a little bit more. That's when it became a true mark of not just for me and those around me. Even though being at an Adventist university, it's easy to become diluted within the culture here. In Thailand, people work for 6 days in a week, right? The only day that they get off is Sunday. So Sabbath is also just any other work day, any other day to go to school if you're studying. Universities have classes on Sabbath as well. So coming to a point where I had to make a choice as to either go for a job that requires me to be at the office 6 days a week, or taking the Sabbath off to be able to worship God, it became more or less a personal decision, more than just something that I grew up doing. And in it, you get to see what God says in the book of Ezekiel, and I think we'll go there later. Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 20, right? In verse 12, it says, moreover, I gave the Sabbath as a sign between you and I, that I am the Lord that sanctifies you. But verse 20 became more meaningful being here because God says that it reminds you that I am the Lord, your God. So now the Sabbath isn't just something that I used to partake in or go through the motions of the worship or anything, but it's a consistent reminder every single week that the Lord is my personal God, and every decision that I make is aligned to that, and my life should be in obedience to Him. And that's what the Sabbath becomes, or that's what it has become for me, rather than just going through the motions of going to church, song service, and everything else.
So what I get from you, Sabbath observance is just, it's not attending Sabbath school and divine service and an afternoon program, then go back home. It's actually something more deeper than that, which is relational between ourselves and God. And I also want to remind those that are, part of this service this evening to feel free to engage as you engage with us in the chat box. And moving on to you, Mwila, I want to find out is there any importance in the home environment when it comes to just the observance of the Sabbath? Looking at the home environment and how you've come to understand how is that important?
All right, so I think probably here it's a disclaimer, but among us as people, I would like to assume Seventh Adventists, it would be something which is common. But I think the first thing would be that there's a lot, the home environment influences a lot of the practices and the culture which one is very comfortable with. And growing up, I grew up with both parents being Seventh Adventists, and they grew up as well being Seventh Adventists in their home. So there was, to some extent, some form of culture which they had grown up with and as well wanted to instill in their home. So that's my background of upbringing. So the environment which I grew up in, Sabbath was something which when I was born that first week, I probably went to church as well or something very similar.
Probably the first day too.
Yeah, so it's not something which I learned to start observing. So it was something which was always happening and something which we as a family observed. However, with that, there are a lot of different things which we as a family grew and were exposed to in our own spiritual walks as a family and in terms of how we understood it. And I think this is where it's also reflective on the family structure and the parents as well, and how they try and instill some of those values and practices as well into, if it's their children, whoever is within the home. So in my case, for example, I think one of the things, just to make it a bit personal, I think was that things like the Sabbath, outside of going to church and everything, there's also us now, the development of saying, okay, Sabbath as well begins from Friday. Your preparation begins on Friday. Sabbath on Saturday itself is something which is like the culmination of it. So things like that, in terms of now you go to school on a Friday, but you know that, hey, once I go home, Sabbath preparation and things like that, you need to start doing things. Those are things which we as a family developed certain practices and things like that, which as well, one becomes very accustomed to, but because it's something which is happening at home, it's almost like it's second nature to some extent.
Thanks, Mwila. And maybe Tammy, in the same vein, you may also want to share your own experience and your own thoughts on the home environment and its importance on the subject that we're discussing. But I would also want to find out from you, is there something that you can point to that, in growing up, you would say, when I saw this, I would then remember that the Sabbath is approaching. What is it? What is that thing that reminded you of the Sabbath when you're in the home environment?
I keep talking to myself. So yeah. So yeah, definitely, like with anything, your environment shapes who you become and how you kind of like perceive things and how you kind of like take things in. And as the cliche statement, you know, we always say, I was born on the pulpit or in the vestry or whatever it is. Both my parents also very Adventist, so you know everything. Yeah, you know, you need to. There's a certain way of doing things. You know, my mom's grandfather was a missionary as well, and that's how they also moved about. So you know, this thing is instilled in you. So every Friday, it's just also how you, when you walk into the house, food is prepped. You can already see the pots are there. Things are done. Okay, the Sabbath is coming. The music, it's a bit, a bit more calmer. There's no jajara. It's not like, you're not just running around, like you can just feel like there's a sense,
Yeah.
And growing up for me, we listened to a lot of Keita. I'm sure there's a lot of other brothers. So once you hear Keita blasting in the back, yes, no.
Sabbath.
It's Sabbath time. So definitely home environment also just shapes how you perceive things and how you're going to, when you have to make decisions, you start knowing, okay, my parents have grounded me in this thing. This is how generally things are done. But now later on, when you start seeing things from your own side and having your own picture, understanding of things, that's when where Kabachi kind of spoke about, now it's about your personal conviction, no longer the home environment. So yeah, I'll just touch on it a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, because sometimes we think we are converted only because we just grew up in an environment that is a Christian environment, and we think of ourselves as Christians. So Malumbo, in terms of the home environment and the whole Sabbath worship experience, and I'm just now taking it away from home as you go and join other families in the worship setup. How does the home, or how should the home prepare you for Sabbath, for a rich Sabbath experience, if I may put it across that way? And also, I'll be interested to knowing what is that one thing, Tammy spoke of food in the house. What is that one thing that told you that Sabbath is approaching as you were growing up?
Probably I'll start with that, with the second part of the question. For me, one thing I knew, which helped me know that Sabbath is here, at least growing up, was that during the week my father would work till the evening, most times, but on Friday he'd be home early. And for me, when I see my dad's home early, it's time. Like normally that time he'd come in enough time for us to also prep, because the house has to be clean. We must wash the car and everything. So he would never bring the car late enough for us not to wash. So at least for me, I knew that if you see the car come home early, Sabbath is approaching. So do the business.
Someone needs to clean the car.
The car needs to be clean. In terms of I guess the family preparing you, and for other, like being with, I hope I understand your question correct, like being with other families as well, and going to church. At least at home, we were grounded in what we knew what we were doing and why. So we keep the Sabbath because of A, B, and C, and we learned that. For example, preparing, there used to be questions: why is it we have to cook this time? Why don't we do this? Why don't we? So at least with our parents, there was enough time for questions to be answered, or at least to be answered in a way that we were a bit satisfied. But there was also, because we knew the why, when we then interacted with everyone else, it was easy for us to, even if we didn't 100% do the same things, we knew the why of what we were doing. And because we know the why, when we're with others, we say, okay, they're not doing it like this, but our whys are the same. So we can sort of work together, as compared to if we talk to someone we sort of didn't see we had the same reasons as to why, then there'd be a bit of, I'm not sure, are you supposed to do that on Sabbath? And being young, you're able to at least you just speak, you know. Now because we're older, you know, we respect each other from a distance. Each is on his own journey and all the that. But when you're young, at least you're able to at least speak to that. But I think what really prepared us from home is that we knew not just what we were doing, but why, and all the things we did. Why did we go to church? Why didn't we just stay home? Why did we stay in the afternoon? Why? At least there was always time for us to have that. And even after church, or after the Sabbath is over, on our drive home, you know, you get questions like, oh, what did you learn today? It sort of instilled this thing like, okay, when we are coming, we're not just coming because this is a social club where we all come and meet up every Saturday. Like, there's something we're meant to learn.
Yeah.
So you then try and store up. When you go to church, you listen so that when you come in the evening, you can bring that across to your parents, and to see them happy with what you have brought, that you actually brought something, makes within you like, okay, this is a good thing, I should do it again. And then so and so as you interact, it sort of went on from there.
Yeah. Thank you. And I remember being told of your young brother Kosa, after he had visited cousins, I think they did something on a Sabbath, and he said he was quite young, I think 4 or 5-ish, if I'm not mistaken. He was very shocked, and he said, "You guys are sinners. How can you do this on a Sabbath?" You know, so I think an important point that you also raise is it's not a matter of just dragging the kids into the car and say we are going to church. It's a Sabbath today, but it's the knowing why we are doing what we do, which is important. Malvin, moving on to you, maybe you may also want to tell us that one thing that told you that Sabbath is approaching, or it was Sabbath in the home as you grew up. But I also now want to move from the home environment and look at the church environment, whether the church environment contributed to your Sabbath experience, and whether you think the church environment, you know, by church environment, I'm talking of when we all come together as brothers and sisters at church, whether that contributed to your, or still contributes to your Sabbath experience. I would also like to hear whether you've got any negative, experiences as well that you think probably shouldn't have happened on the Sabbath. But yeah, that one thing that told you that Sabbath is here.
I think more the same with like timing with the music. The Church in the Wildwood was a DVD of notes. You know, that DVD, I know every song, and it's actually very funny. As you guys were speaking, you find yourself playing the songs years later. Like when they were playing, then you just never really paid attention to them. But then there's something reminiscent about them that when you're working or when you're in the lab, you find yourself playing Gaither's Jerusalem, and you know the words, and then you're like, okay, so this is interesting. But with that point about the home and then the church, it kind of shows how important that influence early on is from parents. Because if I remember the song that we were playing on Sabbath, most likely the things that we used to do are most likely do them as well, because I have an inclination to that, and we are creatures of habit and rather some of our environments. So that kind of makes it very important. As you speak about environment, I think the home is primary because that's where you spend most of the time, and that kind of preparing you towards the Friday, and then especially the Sabbath, and what Manuba spoke about you can't just go there and play and think that nothing's going to be asked of you. At night, you have to pay attention. In the evenings on Saturday, on Friday night, sorry, it was reading the quarterly, and when they ask you the next day at church, what is the lesson about, you must have answers. It was very important. The whole with the environment, I think we're fortunate because we kind of went to the same schools, around the same environment, and also our parents were kind of also friends as well. So even like the friends that I had, or that I still have to this day, observe the Sabbath, and that made it very weird if you were to do something that was not right in the Sabbath. In the church, being a part of the Pathfinder program, I think was most probably the most important thing in observing the Sabbath and learning about the Sabbath, and just church in general. That space where you can still be a kid and learn about God in an Adventist environment that reinforces that Adventist teaching, but still allows you to have friends and socialize and grow. made it very okay to get to an environment where you're not necessarily the same as everybody there, but you know that where I come from, I have friends who are my age who know that this thing is not abnormal. So I'd say that the church for me, I always say this to these guys, that we're very fortunate that our immediate circle that we went to school with, that we played with on Sundays, that we went to church with, was very Adventist, and very is emphasized here. Like, there was no games. If you go to a sleepover at Tammy's house, there's no way that anything that's not being happening at my house is happening that side. There was no escaping the rules in one house by going to this house. You know that if I go to Tammy's house for sleepover, it's the same rules. If I go to Malumbo's house for sleepover, it's the same rules about the Sabbath. If it's a camp that we're going to for Pathfinder, it's the same rules. It does not change. If it's a Sunday, we don't start doing weird things all of a sudden. The things that were taught the previous day at church apply still. On Monday at Patterson Park, when you get there, it's the same. So that kind of consistency reinforced that teaching to the point where when you get to a later stage, it becomes your identity almost, and you can't separate yourself from it, which is a great thing, I think.
Yeah, and if you would go to school and misbehave, and your friends knew about it, they would come and tell a certain uncle who will then deal with you even at church, away from school. That forming the part of the church environment. But that's beside the point. And Kabanchi, do you think do you feel that your own experience, and we are talking personal experiences here, right? Whether growing up or currently, are we as a church consistent when it comes to Sabbath observance? Malvin raised an important point of, if you guys would go for a sleepover at, say, the Soccers, your parents were comfortable in knowing that what was there is what they also teach in their own home. So it's that consistency that I also want to find out. Is it your view today, or maybe as you grew up and as you're still growing up, that we are consistent as a church family in the Sabbath observance?
That's a very interesting question, and I think we'll be very real about it here. But before that, can I just we will be just a moment, but I'd like to touch on to the other question that you asked. I thought it was wonderful. Personally, one of the highlights that I loved about the Sabbath at Edenville Church was when we used to have lunch and the afternoon program at Old's Farm down the road. That was, I don't know if you still have it now, where the church all goes out and has lunch in the park, but that was wonderful because it gave us an opportunity to know that the Sabbath is not just at church within the church building. It's not just being in the parking lot for potluck and then that's it. We're able to experience the Sabbath out in nature. And the older I've become and the more I've read about it, that's what Ellen White also encourages. Like, you shouldn't just be in church all the time in the physical building, but spend the Sabbath out in nature with the Lord. And we did explore a lot of that during Pathfinders and hiking and all those other aspects. So those are just some of the foundational aspects of how we could keep the Sabbath that we learned growing up. And personally, I've kept a few of those. Every once in a while, I decide to have Sabbath out at nearby either a forest here or a dam somewhere where we can actually be able to experience God in nature rather than just being in the physical building before it just becomes a routine and any other routine again. Now going to the question of consistency. Yeah, things have changed from when I was younger to where I am now. And you can see my brothers are smiling because things have changed. Nowadays, church finishes at 12 in some places, and that's it. No afternoon study, no Pathfinders for people to be able to learn the way we did. And I know we're very privileged and blessed knowing that we could be at church the entire day from 9 until 6 or 7 p.m. learning. And we also had the opportunities to have active learning through Pathfinders and all our parents that taught us as our teachers during that time, being able to learn not just about the church, but also the word of God in a manner where we wouldn't just absorb information through a sermon, but also be able to ask questions, be able to have discussions. But nowadays, you rarely find that in Adventist circles, not just here in the East, 12 o'clock, that's the end. We'll see each other again next Sabbath. We don't even do midweek Zooms and everything. It's finished, Sabbath to Sabbath only. So that aspect of consistency hasn't been there. And even just the way we carry ourselves on the Sabbath, we're now more a little bit laissez-faire, per se. Back in the days, I remember I couldn't polish my shoes on Sabbath morning. I couldn't iron on Sabbath morning. You couldn't do that. But nowadays we can get away with, I'll pick up a cup of tea from the Starbucks on my way to church to wake me up. I've had a busy week. All these small compromises, for lack of a better term, that we're now just adjusting to. Oh, I can do. God will understand. He knows my heart. That is more or less diluting the consistency that I've seen, or what we'd call the faith of our fathers that we grew up with, to more or less this neo-modern contemporary type of Adventism or Christianity.
Yeah, thanks, Kabanchi. And yeah, you mentioned picking up a cup of coffee on your way to church. Starbucks, we've got Uber Eats that can easily deliver a meal, you know, for us, even while at church. Or you can take a stroll and you know, just go up the street, buy yourself something to eat during lunch. And from what we've discussed so far, the Sabbath is not limited in the hours of either Sabbath school or the preaching service or the afternoon service, but there's much more into that. And I'd like us to take maybe a short break, just for maybe a comfort break for you, our panelists, a leg stretch. Then we are going to come back and continue. But before we do that, I just want to maybe engage with the comment section, where there's an expression of gratitude for the young people that you have become, and may the Lord continue to bless you, young men, and also expression of interesting engagement. Also, there's a parent that that feels that you're giving them so much credit, and they say thank you. Before we go, I see Malvin, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just had a question, because when Kabanchi was speaking, something just struck me, where I remember, like, growing up, once again, when you'd go to Coronation, or you go to Orange Grove, or you go to Sunnyside, and you go to Edinburgh, there was like very consistent styles of worship that were very like relatable. And then, like, growing up, started going to like Stasm and other churches, and for my life, I was so confused about how is this happening in Adventist church, and it became the question about consistency, and it almost, because you try to balance whether is this wrong, like sinfully, or is it just a different way of worshiping? Do we play drums in church, or do we not play drums in church? Do we, like, what's going on here? And it became a very confusing point for me, where I thought that people were doing something wrong. And to this day, I still struggle with certain things happening in church. I remember I went to a church, and there was a guy preaching wearing jeans and sneakers and a gold shirt. I could not hear what he was saying, because I could not get past the sneakers and the gold shirt. And I'm sure he was speaking some very powerful points, but then I was just blocked by this image that I have of a preacher who, like, where's your tie? Okay, tie is fine, but where's your jacket? Like, and I see something that says this is a bit different, and that point about peculiarity and being distinguished and being visible and individual, I think that's kind of like disappearing a bit, and not from an external like, this is worldly practice, but then even like internally, where within our SDA congregations across different regions and locations, they're so different, and confusingly different sometimes, where sometimes you can't even worship, like, because it's so distracting, and it's so unusual that you're like, I don't know if this is Adventism anymore, or maybe am I the one who's wrong by being overly strict, or is this a bit too much? I don't know, maybe like during the break we can think about it, but I've had that particular struggle where I could not even go to Stasm anymore, because I just could not. Sabbath was not that for me. Well, that's a good thing or a bad thing, maybe, I don't know. But that was a definite challenge for me in terms of consistency thing of Sabbath keeping and Sabbath observance.
Thank you. So that would be our starting point. And at this point, I would like to invite views from the church that is joining us today. Please do type in the comment section, what is your view on what has just been mentioned? is all around Sabbath observance, and we also touched a bit on the experience and consistency. Are we consistent as a church, and how does do we as a church help one another to have that meaningful Sabbath experience? So I'd like us to take a break now. We'll have one song, maybe take a leg stretch, have a glass of water, then we'll continue with the discussion.
Don't forget the Sabbath, the Lord our God is blessed. Oh, for the week the brightest, oh, for the week the best. It brings repose from labor, it tells of joy divine. His beams of light descending with heavenly beauty shine. Welcome, welcome, ever welcome, blessed Sabbath day. Welcome, welcome, ever welcome, blessed Sabbath day. Keep the Sabbath holy and worship him today, who said to his disciples, I am the living way. And if we meekly follow our Savior here below, he'll give us of the fountain whose streams eternal flow. Welcome, welcome, ever welcome, blessed Sabbath day. Welcome, welcome, ever welcome, blessed Sabbath day. Day of sacred pleasure, its golden hours we spend in thankful hymns to Jesus, the children's dearest friend. O gentle, loving Savior, how good and kind thou art. How precious is thy promise to dwell in every heart. Welcome, welcome, ever welcome, blessed Sabbath day. Welcome, welcome, ever welcome, blessed Sabbath day. We welcome you.
Dear host, may I ask for another song? I think that was a little short.
Sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. Let me more of their beauty see, wonderful words of life. Words of life and beauty, teach me faith and duty. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Christ the Blessed One gives to all wonderful words of life. Similarly to the loving call, wonderful words of life. Also freely given, moving us to heaven. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Beautiful words, wonderful words, wonderful words of life. Sweetly echo the gospel call, wonderful words of life. Offer pardon and peace to all, wonderful words of life. Jesus only Savior, sanctify forever.
Thank you and welcome back. I hope our panelists are back. Proof of life, gentlemen. Thank you. Great. Okay. So I think before the break, a question had been posed, and I hope that we will get some feedback as well from the church at large that is joining us. What you seem to suggest, Malvin, is that the way somebody conducts themselves on a Sabbath has the potential to add a blessing or to spoil someone's Sabbath experience. If I heard you, and you spoke, broadly about stazim, you even spoke about dressing, you touched on a lot of things. So the way someone conducts themselves on a Sabbath has a potential to make or break a Sabbath experience for the next brother or sister that is also in the Sabbath. And I see, Mr. Saini, you are nodding your head. Maybe your some reflection on that.
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. A lot of these, church is something which is not, we come and we fellowship with other people and other believers. And I think that is one of what makes it unique. And at the same time, it's also what brings a lot of contention and problems as well. So linking it a bit, we've spoken a lot of our own experiences growing up in the church. And I think when I was younger, you'd see heated discussions, elders, people who are not agreeing with others and aren't on seeing terms with each other, but the next Sabbath, they're in church together. And being exposed to some of these things and knowing how things in church happen and knowing that it really, some of the matters aren't matters which would make one decide not to be at church the next Sabbath, and knowing how people would still be able, I don't want to use the word tolerate, but would be able to accommodate and still find a way of reconciling, and knowing the main purpose of why we are there together as brothers and sisters in Christ. That I think instilled something to know that as we worship with others, a lot of differences are going to arise and are bound to arise. But knowing the purpose and why we are there, firstly, from an individual perspective, your relationship with God, and knowing why what you are seeking to experience and get on the Sabbath makes it much more paramount to some of the other things which one may be exposed to. But one also has agency which they can exercise at the end of the day. Not to say that you have to tolerate a lot of things which are happening, but you're able to as well be in an environment which will be conducive to what you are comfortable with at the end of the day. But things like that, in terms of the environment and things which you see, it does leave an imprint on one. And also, one, I think the most important thing of knowing the purpose of why one is observing the Sabbath and spending time with other believers in Christ.
Thank you. We do have a few questions that have been posed to the panelists. Someone would like to know which part is our visible identifying mark. Is it, and it goes on to say, is it possible that we spend too much time in adorning what we think is holy, that we lose focus of Christ, like what we've been taught? So maybe Tammy, I'll direct this one to you, Mr. Tsoka. Which part is the visible distinguishing mark? Is this the tie, the jacket, the long skirt, or is it possible that we are spending too much time just on the peripheries, or the unimportant stuff? Your view.
Yeah, these are very real questions. And funny enough, when you ask people, because it's important to ask people, Jen, what's your perception or just rather just think an Adventist is. So I generally tend to just go and ask people, or I don't know, I won't say immediately I'm Adventist or whatever it is. I'd like to hear what people thoughts of Adventists are. And they'll be like, oh, those people that dress nicely, ne? Yo, the ones that wear, they will say all these things, the dress, those high heels, yo, the lady. And then to a point where you hear one brother, it's actually a relative, actually a recent experience of mine. He actually said when he went to church, he felt he didn't go back because he felt inferior or underdressed. And I felt actually so bad. I was like, wait, what? And like I said, he's a relative who didn't grow up Adventist, but and he never went back. And I was like, but he says, no, everything was fine, but then I just felt, let me rather say, underdressed, or he didn't have the right clothes or whatever it was. So he actually
didn't
never
fit
went
in.
back. He didn't fit in. And it made me then there's a time I actually had a conversation with my parents, and it's funny enough that one of our people has actually spoken about what is it really that is meant to be the distinguishing mark. Are we focusing too much on appearance, how we look and how we do things? And I know these are also some critical can also be thin lines whereby as humans we don't know how to balance, find a middle ground. So whenever we want to change things, we always swing to the extreme, right? So let's say we're uncomfortable now, let's say the liturgy of the church, and say, okay, like we spoke about the distinguishing mark. We also spoke about consistencies that we find. And liturgy is one of them, right? We know that we go, can be anywhere. We start church at 9. We do an open, things that go like a particular way. But you start asking yourself, okay, is that the only things that matter, or there's more to all this? And I haven't really. I've kind of like also just tried to broaden out so that my brother can also come in and chime in on that. Then I can also come back a bit later. But yeah, so it's funny enough that she mentioned that, and it made me start thinking. And I had a conversation with my parents, and like I said, I felt really bad that he didn't want to go back. He had nothing, no problem, but for him, he felt underdressed or he couldn't fit in. And yeah, I think we can chat more on that, brother. Yeah.
Okay, but thank you. And I'm also cognizant of time. I would like us to move. We still have a bit more ground to cover, but we appreciate the questions that have come through. Then the other question is, and Malvin, please help us with this one. It's asking here that is keeping of the Sabbath as taught by your parents still valid, or should this generation evolve? And I think it's also talking about, the passage of time, the generational gaps. Do you think the way the Sabbath has been taught to you in the past is still valid, or something needs to change?
Short answer, no. And I'm not saying the way I was taught was perfect. And maybe for me, the question is not really on the how to teach, but I think you must teach about Sabbath observance. The how is very dependent on a lot of different things, but the point is that the observance of the Sabbath must be taught. And I think to Malumbo's point earlier on, to a certain degree, the parents' influence over the child has to be exercised in that manner, where as far as you can, to teach and not coerce and force. I think Malumbo raised an important point of not just the act, but the why. And to kind of make it make sense, and that consistency is always just not on Friday night we're serious and then Saturday night it's back to whatever we do. But that kind of consistency throughout, where you can see elements of this message that we live throughout the life, and lessons that are taught on Sabbath in particular throughout life. Evolve, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that word, because the limits of the word evolve are very difficult to find. People can translate evolve into very different things that can kind of stress away from the point of the whole thing. But the short answer, no. I don't think we should evolve out of or towards a different way of keeping the Sabbath. I think the borders of the Sabbath are pretty clear. I think that what we should be doing on the Sabbath is pretty well articulated in the Bible. And maybe the question then could be, is it not working because there's less young people keeping the Sabbath? Then I think that's a better way of looking at it. But even then, I would not suggest evolving the teaching. Maybe the method, yes, definitely. But yeah, I do not think it should evolve to a point where I fear that it may get to a point where you cannot recognize it. And I fully appreciate its strictness as well. You can't polish your shoes on Saturday morning or Sabbath morning is important to me. You can't go be in front of the church a certain way is important to me, because it's the same way that I think about work. I know I can't go to work just like this because it's an important thing. It gives it that distinguishing factor. Now, to the point where it makes somebody feel uncomfortable, that's obviously wrong. But I'm also very appreciative of the peripheries that we say, the dressing. It's peculiar in its sense that the food that we eat, the music that we play, it adds on to the greater Sabbath message, yes, fully. And the way we could teach it could evolve, yes, and I use that word cautiously. But I think paramount should be that teaching, and that teaching should never ever be messed with, in my opinion. The Sabbath should be kept holy, and how we teach that, that's fine, but that should remain in any context.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin. And I know there could be other follow-up questions as well to what you have said, and but allow me to just drive this a bit faster so that we can bring this to a closure. But what you've also mentioned there is referring to an earlier conversation of making sure that in the teaching of Sabbath and its observance, the why is important. So when the why is known, then that will help the young person as they grow up into their adulthood, into their adult life, to to know the reason why they do the things that they do on from Friday evening to Saturday sunset, or things that they should not do within that block of time. Thank you. So now I want to invade your personal spaces. I want to invade your personal spaces. The reality is we do encounter challenges when it comes to the Sabbath. It could be sport in school. It could be a requirement to come for extra lessons on the Sabbath. Malumbo, what has been your own personal experiences where you've had to maybe look at put the Sabbath on balances and weigh it and see whether or not you observe it, or maybe you give in to whatever you was pressing at that time?
Okay. I'll probably have quite a few, but I think I'll probably highlight two. One is like I guess which some people may have experienced is exams being set on Sabbath, and this the interesting thing about this is I went to university that didn't set things on the weekend, but because I went to university in Europe, I learned of a phenomenon where the sun sets like really early, like 4 p.m. the sun is setting, and you're thinking, and so maybe they'll set an exam for 4 p.m. So now 2 months in advance, I must start checking when sunset, because the sunset now is not the same sunset in 2 months' time.
Sure. Yeah.
So I need to know, will my exam land on the Sabbath or not? Because if I need to make a plan, I need to make that plan now. And usually the good thing we had in our university is that you could get a religious exemption, but that's something you have to do when the timetable comes out. But the amount of work I had to do was a lot, because you have to go, you bring it to the university, have to go to the conference, have to talk, have to find a pastor who, like, you do so much work just to move one exam. And so other people like around me, some people did it, some people were like, man, it's a 2-hour exam. Like you write it will be done. There's not a lot of work. Fortunately, it's worked out for me. I've had to maybe write exams earlier than everyone else and then sit in a room for X amount of time till they go in the exam and everything. But that has worked out because I did it in time. And that's one thing I did learn, that if you want these things, doing them early is important. Coming 2 weeks before the exam to talk about it won't help. It won't change. I think the second thing that changed for me is when I came to Sweden, and the Sabbath in summer is long and in winter it's short. Now I got used to that at university, but here it's longer, where the sun sets at close to midnight. Now, basically Sabbath is Saturday, the day, because you probably sleep with the sun still up, and you now long time ago, you had Saturday night, there are activities and things you want to get together, but now we're in Sabbath. So what do you do with Saturday night, because my friends at least would know, okay, during the day he's at church, he's got whatnot, but if we call him at 8 o'clock, all is good. But now I'm like, guys, it's Sabbath. They're like, it's 8 o'clock. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, no, it's summer. Now I have to, my Sabbath has changed. Like, it becomes a very complicated thing, because in their mind, I think for many people, they're quite simple. Like, okay, Sabbath is okay when sun sets, but now summer, sun is not setting. And now I have to set. And I have to say, on a few occasions, sometimes I've been like, all right, it's 9 p.m. What do I do? Do I meet with my friends from work, or I'm still in Sabbath mode? It's been a bit difficult. And then the opposite happens in winter, where you're at the office, it's 2 o'clock and the sun is set. Do you just stand up and leave the office? Or, so that has been a very tricky thing to maneuver sometimes, because it's been quite extreme. I've never had it on that extreme. And so I've heard lots of people discuss, some people, especially some of the friends are from Ghana, they're like, well, we keep the same time. In Ghana, we do 6 to 6. So even here, we'll do 6 to 6, whether the sun has set or not. And then the question is, okay, do we follow 6 to 6 or do we follow sunset to sunset? And if we're following sunset to sunset, if you are in, and I stay in the south, in the north, I hear the sun doesn't set. So how do you do Sabbath if you know the sun is not going to set? Or the sun will not come up.
So the idea really is that I ask the questions here and you answer those questions, but you've brought up a lot of questions that we really need to think long and hard and deep about. And I think I'll be amiss if I just proceed without recognizing something that you said, which I thought is important, and especially for the young people, that months in advance you would look at the sunset times so that you make a plan for your own studies. I think that is very important for everyone, and particularly the young people. It shows the dedication that needs to go into this. So you also talk about the sunset, and whether it's 6 to 6 or it's sunset to sunset. Just a food for thought. It's very easy for us to start, to start the Sabbath on a Friday evening. We always look out and say, no, the sun is still there. There's just that bit of sun. But on a Saturday, the sun sets quicker than, it sets on Friday. For some reason, we're like, it's gone down. The sun is set. Now there's no question on that. So it's, and Ellen White then speaks about, being very careful and, guarding the edges of the Sabbath. I'd like us to move on. So these are examples of, the challenges that you've come across. And I'd like us to talk, maybe Kabanchi, you are you've been through a Adventist institution, maybe your experience as well around the Sabbath. You've interacted with people from different parts, maybe Adventists from different parts of the world, but when you got there, how was Sabbath observance?
In university, Sabbath I was at an Adventist university here in Thailand, the only Adventist university in Thailand. It was easy for us to be able to get into the Sabbath because at 7 p.m. and at 7 a.m. we had this music, Sweet Hour of Prayer for the 777 initiative across campus. Wherever you were on campus, you'd hear that like loud, and that reminded you saying, hey, the Sabbath has begun. So you always wanted to make sure that you had prepared for the Sabbath prior to that. I think my challenge came in after university, after COVID. So some of us, we work incredibly hard during the week, and then when the Sabbath comes around, you're like, I'm too tired to worship. I'll join them on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever. That was something that we've started seeing of late recently. People are like, no, I work too hard in the week. I can't come to church, or I don't want to worship. I'll join on YouTube, I'll join on Facebook. And truth be told, sometimes that worship experience on YouTube or on Facebook is not the same as we'd love it to be, or we imagine that it will be the next day. We'll probably wake up halfway through the sermon, you're having breakfast or something, and not really following or having that worship experience. So that's become a challenge that I found, not just for myself. Sometimes work incredibly hard in the week. You look at the time, it's the Sabbath, and you're trying to rush to put things together. By the time you're resting in the evening, you're so exhausted, you're even thinking about the next day, like, should I go to church or should I not? But before that, or even back in the days growing up, there was no excuse of not going to church except for if you're really, really sick. And even with that one, you have to prove at home that you're very sick for you not to go to, for you to get that exemption or not going to church. So there were no excuses then. And it reminds me nowadays, whenever I feel like, maybe I should not, it still pushes me. If I could go to church then, why should I stop now? And there are blessings in being able to meet and gather and congregate with the believers at church in terms of sharing ideas and what we've learned. It's very, very different from when you're joining on YouTube and all these other social platforms that we made. I think we made it a little bit easier for us not to worship the way we would love to worship by staying on these social platforms. And that's another challenge of this evolving generation that we're having within the social media spheres.
Yeah, thank you. So our conversation is it's very, very difficult to compress it within an hour and a half to kind of get it to where we want to get it. But now maybe just to try and redeem the time, I'm just going to maybe open it up and just have part of those conversations where I would like to know from you, what are those challenges that the young people today are experiencing? You spoke of your own experiences, but I also want to explore a bit more what you think are the challenges that young people are experiencing when it comes, or something that is bringing questions around the Sabbath observance, whether it's from the home or from the other environments that they find themselves in. And in doing so, I'll continue to ask for your guidance, as people who are still young, though grown up, but still young, to your peers, to those that come after you, and maybe also how would you advise parents as well to better instill Sabbath values within their household? So I will start off with Mwila.
That's a very loaded question.
You are loaded too, yeah.
I'll just address two things. I think there's one where when one is under the roof of their parents' home, keeping the Sabbath sometimes is not something which you may want to do, but because you're under the roof of your parents, you're forced to do it and observe it. And that brings about the aspect of one being present, or being there, but not mentally present throughout the hours of the Sabbath. So you may be doing activities, they force you to go to church, but your mind is elsewhere. You may be thinking of the exam which is coming up. You want to go and study, or you're thinking of work and some of the things which are there, but physically I'm stuck here until we go home, or things like that. So I think that something which we experienced in different forms, in different ways. In my personal experience, and I think this with that, I came to an understanding that when we as well read from I think in Genesis 2, when we hear about the Sabbath, the Sabbath, and then we go later on into Exodus as well, that there's the aspect of that, of the Sabbath observance, and also one being able to understand the God of the Sabbath. So it's something which I don't think one can be forced to. One in their own spiritual walk and spiritual journey is going to come through various experiences in understanding and their walk with God. The environment which you've spoken about can all either enable, but even enabling environments, we all know, do not bring about certain outcomes at the end of the day. So I think the most important thing is that of the development of one's own relationship with God. And that, I think, is quite important, in that it's something which one is going to have to go about it in their own time and in their own experiences. And I think one of the things which I'd just like to quote in Desire of Ages, in terms of that, and this is in blessings of the Sabbath. And Ellen White says here, he demands the demands of God are greater upon the Sabbath than any other days. His people then leave their usual employment and spend time in meditation and worship. They ask more favors of him on the Sabbath than upon other days. They demand his special attention. When I came across this years ago, and I think that's also quite important to know, that God wants you to spend time with him. And that's important in knowing that on the Sabbath, it's special, that some of the things which you may be going through and stuff like that, bring those to God. Those are certain things which encourage one to spend time with the God of the Sabbath, as opposed to, as well, it just being a day which we just observe and we do certain things here and there. Yeah, I think that's something which I thought, we could.
So thank you. And Malvin, as well, your thoughts as you also include your closing remarks in that.
Yeah, very important, as Mila mentioned, to have your own personal walk with, and to be encouraged to have your own personal relationship. I'd say more, I guess, more real for me is, I'll hop on this forever. The environment played a crucial role. Just that consistency in messaging at school, at home, in the social spaces was very important in making real the Sabbath and practically reinforcing those lessons. I don't know how they managed to do it personally when it comes to my parents and the parents of these brothers here, but it made it so real, and so it put the Sabbath everywhere. It put church everywhere. There's always a reference point of church somewhere. When you go to school and Uncle Gabriel was preaching on Saturday and he's teaching you science on Tuesday. So it's very difficult to find a different way of thinking about things. And that really helped reinforce. When it comes to challenges as well, I think I always say this, that you are the sum of your environment. The friends that you choose will determine what you're going to do. And this is just across the board. If you're in varsity and your friends are engineers, most likely you will study engineering. There's that one odd person who may study medicine, that's fine, but then we're working with consistencies here. The friends that you keep, if they don't keep the Sabbath and don't find Sabbath observance as important, do not be surprised to find yourself doubting its importance as well. Because those conversations that I had over time will lead you to those types of thinking, if that makes sense. So over and above the home environment, I would say guard jealously your social circle. Try as much as you can to have Adventist friends, even the inconsistent of, let's call them for lack of a better word, because the why remains there. And there's certain, we always talk about this, that as you grow, you make your mistakes, and that's fine. But there are certain limitations that we would have ever gone into in our delinquency, because there was just this strong foundation in Adventism and in God that limits even how bad you become, if that makes sense. And that's important. And if you have friends that do the same things as you do, as you grow up and become naughty, your naughtiness is limited to the church in a weird way. I don't know how Uncle Mayford remembers it, but we gave him decent amounts of trouble but it was within church, and that's fine. You explore that side of you within the confines of church, and it does not get dramatic. Let's say it doesn't get deadly. Where you make a very bad decision very early on in your life because that circle, that fence was not there. I think it's very important to as a parent, I would even say that find a church that has a strong age group that your friend or that your child has, so that they can get those friends. And that, if it's consistent, if it's nurtured, Pathfinders is very important, but make church important. Make church a part of your child's social life. Like soccer was with church friends. When after debating soccer, we're doing Pathfinder homework in Explorer. It just becomes too much in your life for you to ignore it. And eventually, with enough reinforcement, you will get to a point where you're like, okay, what does God mean to me? And you can make that decision to say, okay, I choose God. And that can then later on lead you to like better place in life. But I'm fully supportive of the thing of the deliberate decision to get to a space that you know will encourage your child to get friends that are Adventist or that believe in what you believe in, and they can around the same age group so that they have the same interests as well, and finding ways that Pathfinders it becomes important that can really reinforce that learning in different circles where you cannot necessarily be there yourself, but you know that the teaching is not too far away from what I would like my child to learn.
Thank you, and thank you for that. The importance of the company that you keep. Your friends may not be the coolest, but the fact that you are at least sharing the same belief system, you've got the same understanding. That is very important. Well, I won't talk about the trouble that you gave me earlier in life, Malvin, but all I can say is I've got a few gray strands of hair now. Thank you, James. Kabanchi, your closing remarks and also your reflection on this subject, whether to your peers, to those that are coming after you, to parents.
Thank you. Just to touch on what Marvin mentioned, and just really to build up on top of that, Marvin mentioned one of the points I wanted to mention, which was having the right company around you. But I'd like to look at it from a different perspective. And really, this comes from the question, I think that one of the last questions that we had in the chat, which part must be the visible identification of that mark? And I think it's not just a particular part, or it is not just one mark that we look for. The Sabbath itself transcends more than just the day. It is a reminder of the life that God wants us to live. The mark is the life, right? It's the way we live our lives. It's not just going to church every Sabbath. Going to church every Sabbath should be a reminder of that relationship that we have with God. How am I living, right? And I'd like to touch on James chapter 2, that reminds us, saying, it's not about keeping the commandments one by one, right? Like every single item of the law. It's remembering, because if you break one, you might as well have broken all of them, because it is the same God who said, "Thou shalt not kill," that says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." Right? You can keep all of them, but if you're breaking the Sabbath, you're disobeying, because again, it comes down to obedience and that relationship that we want to have with God. And so the mark itself is how we live our lives, and the going to church on the Sabbath or going to worship on Sabbath is just that reminder, is that renewal for us to be able to continue getting recharged, as Mula mentioned. Like when we go and we spend time with God, quiet time with God on the Sabbath, we're getting recharged, renewed for the week ahead to continue living that godly lifestyle, that holy lifestyle throughout that week, until we have another moment of solitude with God, where we're able to recharge with Him. The advice I'd give in addition to this is to something that I learned, and I've come to learn over the years, is I used to read the Bible and learn from the Bible as if I was learning from a PowerPoint or like items or bullet points, where you read one part of the Bible, oh, this is it, and then I compartmentalize, then another part, and then another part, compartmentalizing them. The Bible, it would be great if we read it more like an essay, where everything flows together and find out where is God in this particular passage? Where is God in Isaiah? Where is God in Esther? Where is in what is He trying to teach me? When we start looking at the Bible as the whole, that it is one God that is speaking to us through all these different experiences and situations, we'll come to appreciate Him a lot more. And we won't be able to take one part over the other. We won't be dissecting the Bible and arguing over different parts, because it is the same God that says, "Remember my Sabbath, keep it holy." And even though times are changing and evolving, it's still the same God that says, "I am consistent. I was the same yesterday, I'm the same today, and I'll be the same tomorrow. He's that consistent God. And so it's not just about the Sabbath, it's the lifestyle that he wants us to live, a lifestyle of consistency. And often at times in life or in the outside world, they say the only thing that's constant in life is change. But God says, no, not just change, but I am constant as well. So times may change, things may change, but the same God that says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, is the same God that will empower you and I to be able to keep the Sabbath holy. Being in the East, here with Buddhism, it's quite interesting because when we try to outreach to the Buddhists or the locals in Thailand, it's you have to have a different dynamic. Back at home in SA, we could have crusades, we could have campaigns, we could give out literature, and people would come to church. But here, it's a very different lifestyle. People here believe in karma, right? Because of the Buddhist belief that if I do good, good do come to me. So here, people generally do good because of that aspect. You can leave your car parked, the engine running, no one will take it, no one will open the door and steal it. You can leave your goods when you go shopping. You can leave them on your car or on your motorbike and no one will touch them because of that aspect. And so when I first came here and we're trying to figure out how we could be able to reach out to Thai people with our university campus plans, we discovered that all these methods of preaching and all these things did not work for them. What they were actually interested in were how we lived our lives. When they ask, hey, why don't you eat pork? And you're like, oh, I don't eat pork because, oh, why are you good? You're Adventist. You don't believe in Buddha saying that, oh, if you do good, something good will happen to you. So why are you nice? Why do you smile all the time? Why do you seem as if you don't have any issues in life? Or why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
That becomes like that opening in which we're able to share who God is to them, because doing good is something that they do. They do it for, of course, a different motivation. But then how we live our lives here tells more of a testimony of who God is rather than all the sermons that we can preach. And that's what Ellen White says, a life lived in accordance to the Lord is better than any sermon ever preached. So that's something that I've come to learn here, that yes, the Sabbath has that visible mark. The visible mark isn't just going to church on the Sabbath, but it is how we live our lives. It is going to be the same mark on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if we're consistent in how we live our lives. And those are my closing remarks and what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Kabanshi. Tammy, your closing remarks and reflections.
Yeah, we've touched on a lot of things. And as a young person, to be honest, so we can be real about it, there's point in times where you will question. Everyone will be talking about what happened over the weekend. This was fun. You were not there. The sporting activity was fun. I personally remember a time exams at University of Pretoria, especially maths, were on a Saturday, and you only had one opportunity. And I'll be honest, like I'd never struggled. Maths was always, something that came relatively okay for me. Second year engineering, you only have one opportunity. I flunked it and I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait, I'm doing all these things, not going, and just the year, and I've never ever thought I would ever say course is chowing, because I'd never felt like that before. And I'm just being honest. Like, it was the first time. First year, golden key or whatever it is, second year, mathematics, the final one. And so on Saturday, I'm like, no, I'm not going to write it. I write it and I fail. And then I'm like, wait, how I've done all these things. You do start to question, and you start thinking, you start thinking, okay, maybe if I check this box and this box, then things should go well for you. But it's not really necessarily about that. Fast forwarding until now, like now it's present, now that I'm working and all that, you realize there's an appreciation of the Sabbath that I now have, honestly. It's actually fun. You actually look forward to it. Sometimes I actually see myself looking forward to Friday night and saying, and as opposed to when I was younger, sometimes you are trying to get to the night, like, no, Sabbath must finish, but you actually look forward to shutting down and just being focused on the Sabbath. And you start, and I have a friend who always makes jokes saying, hey, if they had a graph of the most laziest people, I think Adventists would be at the top. And because we don't do anything for one day and they do everything every other day. But now science and people and health people are now talking about the importance of rest, the importance of recharging. And you find that God obviously had a purpose and the reason for us to have a Sabbath. And you find that for health benefits, for all these things, it's important to have that opportunity to shut down and be able to just focus on God and on this mark that He set for us. So now, to be honest, I do find more of an appreciation for it than I did before. And like I said, I'll be honest, you will get to a point in time where you question things, and but now it's about moving away from taking things and saying, because I've done this, this, and that, then things should be fine. But more about what Kavanchi spoke about, that building that relationship and not just trying to just go and follow a program but rather trying to have an experience. And also, I feel like a distinguishing mark should be us being of service. I really believe that. More than us just sitting in church and listening to a sermon and saying I've accomplished Sabbath. That's why then it becomes a monotonous routine whereby you're just coming up, going, you sit down, you sing 5:30, you sit down, you stand up, you sit down, pastor preaches, and it becomes monotonous. Whereas opposed to, you need to realize that God said, go ye therefore, and I should be of service. And even also during the week, whatever opportunity I find to be of service, let me try and utilize it. That's one thing especially right now, that I try push back, be of service. The Sabbath, you can be of service. And I know we've started doing GYD a lot. And I know in the beginning it was a bit of a pressing matter, with some people saying you shouldn't be doing certain things, but being of service for me, even on the Sabbath, I think God also was, Jesus say it's important to be of service. Yeah. Whereas opposed, the Good Samaritan story, we know it. Priest runs over and he's running after his meetings or whatever it is, and he's forgetting the most important thing, which is being of service. Yeah.
Thank you, Tammy. Some important points there, and I'm sure everyone is speaking something from the conversation that we are having. And last but not least, Malumbo, your closing remarks, your thoughts, reflections, advice to your parents, to your peers, to the church family.
All right. I guess I was also going to answer a bit of the question you had asked. I guess it's both advice and the challenge with youth. Like, as much as we, like, I think Mwila sort of talked about it, where we come from, like your family, your parents is where you get your appreciation when you're young. And then you go into your larger tribe where your friends and your church is there. And some people sort of get lost in that, and maybe they might be physically there, but not. But with youth, at least people who are hitting, I guess, their late teens, early 20s, your community is still the most important thing. Now, yes, it's true that as an individual, your relationship with God needs to be there, and that should help motivate. And you should also, like Marvin said, like, choose your friends wisely. But there's also an onus on the people around the church, because sometimes the church itself sort of gets sucked into what it is doing. Because there's all this at church and we do this and that, and sort of gets sucked into that. And maybe not just church, but the Sabbath as a whole. Like, there is stuff we are doing that we get so sucked in that we don't notice people slowly going on the periphery. The story of Eutychus, they were there together and he was on the window, but no one noticed that this guy is dozing, he's sleeping, until he fell out the window, because everyone was so in the sermon. They didn't see the person falling out of the window. And I think with youth that happens, because as much as everyone wants to be, and everyone is obsessed with the cult of individualism and so on, there's still this want to be part of something, part of a group. And if you feel that the people I keep Sabbath with, I'm not really part of them, you slowly slip out and slip out and slip out until you're like, you know what is this Sabbath thing? Like, I don't know. And I've seen it happen a lot. I've been in certain circumstances where like I was like, I'm there, but I'm not there. But maybe what helped me was because of my grounding, where I came from and how things were, I was still resilient. But I know for many people, maybe they haven't had that background. And so it's very important. And in fact, my brother and I were talking about this morning, or this afternoon actually, about like sometimes where youth come and there's a group of youth that already, they know each other. So, you know, when you come, somehow you greet the people you know, and you sort of get into that and you start discussing. And before you know, you don't even notice that there's someone who's not part of this group. And they watch a bit from the periphery. They try to put themselves in a space where they can be seen, because maybe they're not the person who's going to bring themselves to you. But you get busy with everything you're doing, and let's say you have Pathfinders, or you have church, or you have Friday night something, and you sort of forget this person and they slip out. And maybe sometimes as a church, maybe it's not youth, maybe it's just as a church, we're so busy keeping the Sabbath that we don't notice other people slipping out of the Sabbath. And fellowship is a big part. I mean, even when we read Hebrews, where it talks about not forsaking the gathering together, like there is an important aspect when it comes to fellowship, even with the Sabbath, that helps keep us. And so now as a community, as much as each person should look for the community and try put themselves in a good place, the community needs to do its part in helping each other keep the Sabbath. Yes, our parents did that, but not everyone came from that background. And we need to be more of our brothers' keepers in terms of helping each other with the Sabbath. Yeah, and I guess just reflection. I think we've talked about a lot of things. I think it's very important. The principle and the why of the Sabbath is the most important thing. Once you understand why. Yes, I think someone brought about things changing. Yes, over time, things have changed. The way people kept Sabbath at a certain point, the songs they sang, whatever, have changed, but the guiding principle has never changed. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to the Sabbath.
Yeah, gentlemen, thank you very much. And Malumbo, as you say, we are our brothers' keepers. They are those that were not privileged to have a background such as we've had. We are here to stand in the gap for such brothers and sisters, so that we support one another in this journey that we're taking. It's getting quite late, and it's quite early for Kabanchi. We appreciate your time, Kabanchi, for being up into the wee hours of the morning as we had this discussion. It's, for me personally, it's this is an emotional conversation, not just because of the subject itself, but because of the brothers that have joined me this evening. Today I'm calling you gentlemen, my brothers, and I mean we've come a long way, and we've shared some pictures during the course of the week from back then. But I just want to appreciate what God has done in your lives and what He's continuing to do, and I hope that He continues to bless you. And as I said at the beginning, I was very much impressed to know that you're still together, you're still studying together, and sharing and expressing the Word of God together. May God continue to richly bless you. I also want to acknowledge those that are joining us from far and wide. I won't even mention names, lest I won't mention you all, but we appreciate everyone who's been on this platform this evening to listen to this important subject. I think it is a subject that we need to visit and revisit and help one another as we walk this journey. Before we close, I'd like to make a few announcements. The Sabbath Symposium, it goes on, and we finish tomorrow, sunset. So because of the programs of the day tomorrow, our Sabbath school is starting 30 minutes earlier. At 9 o'clock, Sabbath school is starting, and we are continuing on this subject of the Sabbath, our visible distinguishing mark. Then we'll also have another panel discussion in the afternoon, starting at 3 o'clock. All are invited. And also tomorrow we've got a very special service, which is baptism, that will happen during the 11 o'clock hour. We are all invited as well. So thank you, my brothers, for joining us this evening, and thank you for your thoughts and for allowing yourselves to be vulnerable, to share with us your thinking, your childhood, and some of your own personal views and thoughts, which also involved your families. May God continue to richly bless you. I would like at this moment to ask that our host plays us a song, and after the song is played, may I ask, I'm just going through the names here. There's another soldier that I've seen online, Mpala. I'll ask that Mpala prays for us as we close after the song has been played. Over to you, host.
Thank you.